His voice is powerful. His voice is needed in this, I call it a black state. It's not even blue, it's just black. But with all the action that we can learn by coming to these meetings, getting involved with each other, getting involved in our legislative districts, we can become a stronger team, and if we do not do that, we will lose the right to this flag. The one that was fought for, died for. Families are still mourning the loss of their loved ones, only because justice is not respected. So, sir, I would love you to come on up and give us your latest and greatest on everything that's going on.
And I'm going to move that across here real quick. Always happy to be in front of a group of people that care about liberty and freedom. And it's good to be out here in the Bremerton area. It's about an hour and a half from where I live. I live in South Thurston County, so not too, right between Tenino and Rochester. I handed out these bio sheets, and you can kind of see them there. Everybody probably has them. And I don't oftentimes do a presentation on the anniversary of 9/11, and the reason why I start this out with the Twin Towers here is that a lot of people know, if you look at the end of that bio sheet, I'm a fifth generation Washingtonian. I love Washington. My kids are sixth generation. So despite that, though, I actually ended up going back east to New York City to go to college. And one of the things I did when I was there, I was going to a school called Columbia University, a terrible school that's actually produced some of the worst people we've ever had in this country running government, and I went to school with them. But one of the things that I did when I was there, I was on the cross-country and track team, and we would take prospective students that would come in, and you're trying to convince them to go to Columbia. And so one of the things I would do is I would take tours. I would take students and their parents on tours in New York City. So I used to take them on tours at the top of World Trade Center. I probably did 50 tours at the top of the Trade Center over the years, just prospective students and their families. A number of dates I remember with girlfriends at the time, you know, going to the top. I remember taking my grandma in the late 90s. I brought her back to New York City, and she'd never been there before, and I wanted to take her to the top of the World Trade Center. And so the thing that I kind of remember about this is that a lot of people who live out here, right, we don't necessarily have an attachment to this specifically, other than, of course, that was a terrible day 22 years ago. But I remember I used to run, I was on the track team, cross-country team. We would run from the North Island and all the way down to the south part of Manhattan. And we would actually go right next to the World Trade Center and run. That was kind of our target. You know, as you're running through the city of Manhattan, it just stood on the skyline. And so if you were kind of veering off, you weren't sure which street you were on, you could always look up and see where the World Trade Center was and end up there. It was about a 13-mile run that we always did on Sundays. But I remember I was just in New York a few months before 9/11, and I was there. I used to do startup companies, and I was there trying to raise money for this little startup company that I was working on. And I came out of a meeting, just one of the buildings right next to the World Trade Center. And I remember looking up to the top of the World Trade Center in 2001, right, just a few months before 9/11. And I remember thinking, you know, I haven't been to the top in a couple years. You know, I used to do it all the time, but it had been a little while. And I thought maybe I should just go, since I've had some time, and I'll just, you know, go to the top of the World Trade Center. And you had to pay like $10. It was a $10 expense. But, and I was thinking about it, and I thought, nah, it'll be here next time, you know. So you don't know what you have until you lose it, right? And today, this is all most people will remember about 9/11, right? But of course, you have a whole generation growing up now. They have no idea what it was like to have something that people just took for granted, and then it's gone. So I think that one of the things that it does serve as a good reminder. There's no way that I could represent my limited attachment to the World Trade Center as anything close to the people who, of course, suffered genuine tragedy that day. I don't know anybody who died in the World Trade Center. I knew people that used to work there. I knew people who escaped it. I had friends of friends, but there wasn't anybody I personally knew who died there. But it was still a tragedy felt by everyone. So I'm always reminded, of course, that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And it's something that we have to remember, I think, as we move forward. This has actually been a quote attributed to Thomas Jefferson. And I don't think, when you actually look at the origins of the quote, I don't think he actually specifically said this, although this would have accurately represented the sentiment of the Founding Fathers at the time. This actual quote really comes out of some stuff that people were talking about in the early 1800s. In America, at least when you go back and you try to find the origin of the quote, but I think it's an important one to remember. It's easy for us to lose track of the significance, the times that we live, and put it in the historical context that it deserves. And because of that, because of a lot of reasons, I think it's very easy for us to get apathetic or intimidated from being involved and being engaged with the important issues, I think, that do face us every day. So if there's a theme that I want to have and present to you today, and then I plan on opening this up for questions and answers, I'll do my best to answer your questions, is to recognize that we have to be eternally vigilant if we care about freedom and liberty. It isn't going to exist just on its own. It was a very radical concept in the late 1700s when it was actually put pen to paper, and probably one of the most radical ideas that had ever been advanced, certainly, and implemented as a nation. And those are powerful ideas that there's going to be, they step on the toes of all who want to take the freedom and liberty away. And there's a lot of reasons why big government, the people who push big government policies, there's a lot of reasons why they don't like our freedom and liberty. And they will do anything to take it away. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the guise of a socialistic Marxian sort of approach to the world, which is what we see a lot today. Could be other attacks, destroying the education systems. You can dumb down people as much as possible so they don't know the history that we live in. But regardless, we live in times in which eternal vigilance is required. Now, that doesn't mean that we live in a time as challenging sometimes our founding fathers did, but each generation tends to face it in their own way in different approaches. And if you care about liberty and freedom today, that actually means you're just part of the rebellion at this point in time, because the government that we have, or at least those that we've allowed to take over the government, running the bureaucracy or the elected officials, they have lost, I think, all track as to what their role should be in government. How many of you are aware of the New Mexico governor, right, who came out and decided that the Constitution is just not absolute? One day she can decide to pretend like it doesn't apply, and neither is her oath of office, right? Now, she got attention for that, but don't think that's not the same thing that most of them believe at all times. Now, if you were to ask her, well, the Constitution makes slavery illegal, so could just slavery be implemented at a whim tomorrow? Of course, she would say no. But the logic that she's using to try to take away your right to defend yourself is no different than the logic of the statement that I just made. And so there's a complete collapse of a recognition, I think, of our elected class and the bureaucracy that kind of supports them as to who they actually work for. So for those of us who care about freedom and liberty, that means that we're basically part of the rebellion, right? That's me. So you and I have to stand up for our freedom and liberty. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to go and fight revolution. Founding fathers did that once. I'd certainly prefer not to have to do that again. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. But of course, when people talk about freedom and liberty, they're oftentimes thinking, being an activist, they oftentimes think of this, right? This is from Poland in opposing communism and just before the Berlin Wall fell, right? Just one of the ways that they started to erode the hostility and kind of the edifice of communism in Eastern Europe was they would have protests out there in the streets. And oftentimes we talk about activism. This is what we're usually thinking of. But activism in America really has historically taken a lot of roots. And I think that the one thing that we oftentimes lose track of today is that there's a history of activism in America that generally was very civically engaged. The founding of our country, there was a large percentage of people who lived in America that were very hostile to slavery. It was really a huge movement in America to abolish slavery. The origins of the Republican Party, this is a Republican club. The origins of the Republican Party were to oppose slavery. Washington State was strongly founded by people who moved here, especially after the Civil War, who were incredibly opposed to slavery and were strong Northern supporters. I mean, it was a very dynamic element of Washington State. In fact, one of the first Republicans that was elected in the original in 1889, our first state legislature, was Owen Bush, and he was a black man who'd moved here from Oregon because Oregon wouldn't allow black people to own property. It was actually, they had restricted that, and so they were concerned, and so his family had moved up to Washington. And one of the first things that they did when the very first Washington State legislative session was to enshrine property rights into state law more clearly even than the Constitution had at the time. Now that's all been forgotten because I think that the modern political class doesn't want you to realize how much power you really have. And even in Washington State, we've actually had these cycles of citizen activism that has periodically popped up over the years, usually separated by about 40 or 50 years in between, where citizens like you and I got engaged, got involved, and decided they wanted to change what was going on in government. It's happened many times here before. Now, of course, when you have people like this in charge, right, it's not hard to really, to wake some people up, and unfortunately, he may be just the figurehead of what we face today, because below a clown or somebody that's totally out of control at the federal level, we have a lot of people at the state level and local level who really are doing probably more harm directly to us than necessarily the clown show back in DC. So, and ultimately I think, one of the things this comes down to is just a basic choice of, are we gonna, these are fundamental decisions and threats and issues that we have to address today, and are we going to exist in a place where we have free speech, genuine free speech, or we're gonna exist in a place where that's not allowed? There's an email that I have from a couple years ago where I did this interview with a homeless activist downtown Olympia who had registered a bunch of people to vote. And then according to her, when the voting time came around, right, she'd registered about 600 people to vote, and the homeless people never got their ballots, but somebody voted for them anyway. And that was the story that I did at the time. Now that video obviously didn't give me any friends at the auditor's office or anywhere else. And so I have this email where the video that I did at the time, there's an employee who worked in the county auditor's office who was trying to get my video censored off of YouTube. And it's in his own writing, basically trying to find a way to censor that interview. And that's how our government operates today. Because I think one of the things that they want to do is make sure that if there's anything, they're going to want to make sure that while they're abusing you, taking away your property rights and your freedom and liberty, they definitely fear your voice. And they fear your activism, and they want to silence you. They don't just want to silence me, right? They want to silence you. And then even nominal resistance, I don't know how to necessarily call it, but socially current people, who may not even be that political overall, but they have concerns or issues, doing something that pretty much has been consistent in American history only for a few hundred years, right? Where they would make protest songs or something like that. But of course, they immediately want to label somebody like that as being far right, whether or not that's how he defines himself. But how dare you question the political class? So I think that's a social problem that we have to face today, and recognizing that if we care about liberty and freedom, free speech is fundamentally important. And if it's silenced, censored, or shadow banned, or all these other efforts that they have to kind of prevent you from speaking, it's because they fear it. They fear the truth, and they fear what you might say about them. And boy, they are happy to find some ways of pushing back. There's let's see, it's August 21st. There was a group called Indivisible Bellingham. It's a nasty leftist group that's been funded by a lot of rich leftists. And they had a forum up in Bellingham where they presented this program. They rated all the school board candidates running for office currently. And one of the ways that they rated a candidate with an F was if you said, "I believe in equality." That meant you got an F. Because The left no longer believes in equality. They don't believe it at all. And if you say that you believe in equality, that means that you probably are a terrible person and shouldn't be on the school board, because what they believe in is equity, right? Equity means distributing basically the joys and wonders of socialism in one way or another across the spectrum, you know. This is, of course, you've seen cartoons like this, right? The equity in theory, you know, being over here where, oh, okay, everybody needs help, and then they're all able to look over the fence. It's a very common cartoon, but of course the equity in reality is chop everybody down, you know, as it always has been from the French Revolution, from Rousseau's concepts of how to run government to today. It always turns into this. Because the biggest danger I believe that we face today is when you have people come in. It's not even really the culture wars that are our biggest threat, because we can prevail on those. The biggest threat is when government comes in and decides that they're going to impose a top-down mandate and really have the ability to have a huge impact in your day-to-day life. So big government, the bigger the government is, the smaller our freedoms become. And that is almost a perfect math equation, by the way. It's something else that usually Democrats deny exists. But math is real, and the bigger government comes, the less money and freedom that you and I will have. And so one of the things about being a liberty and freedom activist is finding ways to shrink the size of government. It's a fundamental part of who we have to be, I think, looking forward, because, you know, otherwise you have situations here where government doesn't really work for us, right? It becomes so big that we're begging for scraps at the table. Please make sure that I get my PPP loan, right? Please don't, you know, give me an exception on my taxes. You know, please can I build a porch that's 6 inches longer than the permit, you know, requires. Whatever it is it changes our relationship. And of course, fundamental things that we expect government to be able to do are conveniently dropped along the way. The ability to enforce the criminal code, right, is a good example. Some of you know I was involved in a shooting on my property last year. It's actually about a year ago today. And, you know, I run into this terrible criminal and he decides to attack me. Longest story as to why he only got shot in the arm. An amusing story in a way too, because, but nevertheless, high drama, right? And when I background checked that guy, while I was waiting for the police to come out, because he conveniently had a driver's license on him, you know, he'd been arrested dozens and dozens and dozens of times. He'd been in jail dozens of times. The best I could tell, just looking up his criminal history, was that he had victimized hundreds and hundreds of families just in our community alone, but 5 counties, you know, I mean, Grays Harbor, Lewis County, everywhere. And no, this guy wasn't going to jail. He was just going to keep victimizing people. You know, probably the worst thing that happened to him was running into me that day. But it was just, you know, and he's back at it again. They didn't, you know, nobody's doing anything about it. So the fundamental basics that we expect government to be able to do is just the basic, just a bad guy should probably go to jail sometimes. They aren't doing that. And that's willful by policy and as a way to generate angst, I think, and concern in the community so they can justify bloating government bigger with money that's not going to help you at all. And of course, the lockdowns, right, they did not exactly help anything. They helped give us an idea that government, given an excuse, is going to abuse our freedoms and liberty first chance they get, which is why this statement from the New Mexico governor so recently is a concern and a problem, right? So the other thing you'll notice is if you have friends on the left, and I continuously recruit and reach out to people on the left, because everyone has their own road to Damascus moment. People know I recruit whistleblowers in government. That's the best people to find out, to tell me what's actually going on and to help me expose the truth. And one of the first things they discover is the minute they've diverged from the orthodoxy of the day, they instantly are attacked and threatened, right? Because you must only believe a certain thing. And of course, you know, you get government in charge, you know, where they believe that, you know, you must obey them, right? I mean, they really have this paternalistic, nasty view of the world that's not consistent with how our country was formed, nor how we think about ourselves as a free people. But in the end, remember, what they want you to do is to feel alone. They want you to feel helpless, hopeless. One of the reasons why they prefer to silence people like me or others is because if I give you hope to get involved or engaged in the process, that's a threat to those who want to steal or do more bad things in government. So they want you to feel like it's hopeless, or they want you to feel alone. Or they want you, you know, now of course, You know, when you look at how, this is how the left protests, right? Let's go up in Seattle and burn down the city, and let's go and destroy cars and set things on fire and assault people and kill them, right? And nobody gets in trouble for that. Or even let's just secede from the whole country and create Chaz Chop in Seattle, right? 8 blocks. I mean, it's the first secession movement in America that I'm aware of, at least in the last 150 years, and nobody did anything significant about it. Nobody got in trouble for that, as radical an idea as it was, right? And the only people who got killed there by these guys were young black men, right? The very people that they claimed that they were here to protect. But you can't just all bunker up and surrender and go into your underground bunker and hope that somehow you'll come out on the other side with a different world. And that's, I think this is actually a common problem for freedom and liberty people. We always believe in being prepared. I certainly do. And I'm sure many of you do as well. But there's a difference between being prepared and isolating yourself from the community, thinking that somehow if I just stick my head in the sand or hide in a bunker, everything's going to go away and be solved on its own. It will not. It does require some level of intervention. You don't necessarily have to take the tea and throw it into the harbor, but there's going to have to be some level of activism and intervention, I think, that we have to make a difference. It's not always that dramatic either. And I think that one of the ways we do that is we focus locally. I love Washington State. I love my community here. I'm not going to surrender this place to the left. A bunch of people, how many of you know people that have left the state in the last few years? Yeah. So now I'm hearing from my friends that have left the state. As they discovered, a friend of mine moved to Casper, Wyoming, and discovered that the homeless camp, not far from him, that was allowed to sit in the hotel completely destroyed and trashed it. And the governor, the mayor of Casper, Wyoming was shocked, right? Because, yes, he's a Republican, but he's an idiot, and he basically does the same thing that Democrats do here. And they convince themselves even partisan labels don't really matter. Dumb ideas are infectious just as much as the truth can be, and they are spreading all over the place. My friends in North Dakota just discovered a massive corruption problem in their local school district, and look, he thought he left when he left Washington. The problem exists everywhere. It doesn't matter whether you move to Texas or Idaho. This is a fight we can't run away from. We have to stop it, and we have to stop it now, or be involved to stop it now. You know, I know there's people who won't vote, right? They say, because there's a lot of problems in our voting system, right? But nobody's going to be impressed that you thought you had your awesome protest and didn't vote. I probably don't have to tell you this, but you all have friends that don't vote, right? We all have friends that think that's some level of protest. And the truth is, that's a foolish approach. If you don't vote, somebody's voting for you, especially in a mail-in voting program. So, you know, nobody cares that you don't vote other than the fact you're part of the problem. Now, that doesn't mean that when somebody's screaming and yelling at you, trying to make you do dumb things, that you should do it, right? And we have that problem on our side sometimes as well. Instead, if you really want to make a difference, I think what you have to do is you find local groups of people who care about the issues that you do, and you create a team, because nobody's an island. People see me alone sometimes out here, and they think, well, Glenn, you're doing all these things. And I'm certainly more visible than a lot of people are in the state. But there's always people I'm working with all the time. I'm training other people. I'm involved I have whistleblowers on the left and in government. They're giving me information, and you're finding teams of people, right, to make a difference. You have to find that team, and believe me, you can make a huge difference. You also have to find something that you like. I do a lot of activism training. I'd like to do some more out in this neck of the woods. But one of the things I don't give you is a 12-step process, and if you do exactly these 12 steps, nirvana comes tomorrow, right? That's not really how it works. One of the things that you can't fit a round peg in a square hole. If you don't have a passion for that subject, I can't get you motivated to go out and do it, and it's foolish for me to try. But I do want you to find your passion as to what you want to fix locally. That's your school board, your city council, crime, right? Whatever the issue is that you want to address locally, identify that. And then what I can do is help you pick your topics, pick your strategies, pick ways to be most effective. I care about your time and your life energy, and I'd rather have it spent on things that are going to be more effective than not. So in the end, the only thing I'd like you to do is just join the rebellion, That's who you are. Whether you want to believe that that's who you are or not, we are. And freedom and liberty is always rebellious. And but let's be productive, let's be capable, and let's be effective with what we're trying to do. So that's the end of my official presentation here, and I want to open this up for a Q&A for anybody who's interested. So, yes, ma'am.
So the Act Blue.
Yes.
Where are you on that? I know our county got a list, but we haven't done anything with it because we haven't gotten any further guidance.
Yeah, one of the problems I'm finding with Act Blue is that the FEC keeps changing their historic data. And so when I try to file a complaint, the data is changing every day. Historic data. Like, there's no way that should happen. Like, there's something significantly wrong. And so we're trying to work on a bigger issue right now related to that. That exposed a huge problem, because if the historic data from 2021, the numbers, and I mean, when I say change, I mean radical change. It's like multi-million-dollar shifts of amounts. And the only way that can happen is somebody at FEC is allowing, or they're hacked or something, and so the math keeps changing. Because otherwise, when I file a complaint, the data that I'm providing them is totally different by the time they actually go around to look at it than what it was there. It's actually exposed. If you've read some of Bill Brooks' writings out of Skagit County on this, there's some huge problems, I think, that are being uncovered by this Act Blue scandal. And it's a lot bigger than just people who are used as mules for fake contributions. It's just a fundamental rot at the basic reporting level for the campaign money in the first place at the federal level.
So you can't date your information that you're pulling?
You can, and it changes every day. And so you can submit. We've been doing downloads of the national database and showing these bizarre shifts, historic, not current. You'll have changes in campaign finance law reports, like if you've ever filed and you realize, hey, I made a mistake, I'm going to go back and I'm going to make an adjustment. It happens, but it's documented. You can see why. These are things I can't, there's no paper trail. They just suddenly, the amounts keep shifting and changing. Now that's a fundamental problem that's much bigger than what I thought we had on our hands initially. So we're in the middle of this process. Now I do have a number of sheriffs that have come forward who are willing to actually prosecute criminal cases against Act Blue or related to it. But interestingly enough, in the counties in which they're serving, suddenly there were no longer any Act Blue problems there, right? You got to expose the truth, and it may be a dark rabbit hole you go down. But so I don't want to waste people's time until I have a real clear-cut piece of action. Theoretically, that's not going anywhere. Although if the data keeps changing, I don't know what to do about that exactly. So. Act Blue, how many of you don't know what Act Blue is? I'll get it. Okay, so Act Blue has to do, it's a payment aggregator for mostly left-leaning causes. Started in 2004. They filter billions of dollars, about $13 billion, into leftist groups. And so they report, who pays these campaigns or who's giving money to these campaigns. And the scandal was exposed most recently. I actually came across this in 2012, and now it became more blown out of proportion in the 2020 election, where suddenly people, like an 87-year-old retired person was suddenly making 16,000 contributions in a year through Act Blue of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they live there on Social Security, right, in a little shack. You go to their house and you go talk to them and say, hey, did you make these contributions? They don't even know what you're talking about. And why that matters is that means that their name and their identity is being used. You've heard of stolen identity, where somebody will use your name, but nobody's stealing money from them. They're just using their identity to mask the source of funds going to political causes. So if you're familiar with money laundering or anything related to that, it's like a money laundering operation for political campaign finance.
So like in Kitsap County, the list I saw, somebody showed they donated $176,000, another person, $125,000.
Right.
And those are many donations.
Yeah, and so the Kitsap County list, we had some, though. I will tell you the reason why we were doorbelling the homes to ask them is that we had a couple that looked really weird, and we went to them, and even if they were fraudulent, most of their Democrat donors, right? So some of them just said, well, I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with that. Great, somebody's using my name to fraudulently kick cash in. I hate Republicans, so who cares, right? So we've had that. We've also had it where we actually did run into a guy who legitimately did make those. That was his addiction, right? He'd go online, just like people put money at the casino. He was just dropping money into the Democrat Party. So sometimes that's why you have to go to the door and find out what's really going on. Yeah, that was a weird one. Sorry, there was another question back here. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to ask you to explain that scam that you just did.
Oh, good. Okay, I hope I explained it adequately enough. And Some of you might know I do a lot of Public Disclosure Commission complaints, with the local version of our campaign finance laws, Public Disclosure Commission in Olympia, and I've filed a lot of them, and I've had pretty good success, I think, on exposing the truth with those complaints. So far, in fact, I reference it in my bio there, and it's on the front page of my website, where I've got about 227 politicians, judges, and PACs that have been sanctioned over the last few years based on my complaints, about $625,000 in fines. That's going to go up a lot because I was kind of asleep at the switch for a while, so I kind of caught up and I filed about 100 complaints, actually against almost every Democrat Party group at the county level. Not all of them, but I would say 80% of them, and a whole bunch of other big union groups and big PACs, shady PACs. So I'm interested to see what the resolution of those investigations are, but I've kind of overwhelmed the Public Disclosure Commission office, so most of their employees are investigating my complaints right now, and because I filed so many, it's easy for you to track that, by the way. There's pdc.wa.gov if you want to go there, PDC, so Public Disclosure Commission.wa.gov, and you look up enforcement cases, and you'll see the list. It changes every day because I filed so many, they're only able to process like 3 or 4 a day where they post them up there. And it's not just Democrat groups. I shared the concern of my Democrat friends who said I was being too partisan. So I also hit the Green Party and the Progressive Party as well for their violations. So that makes me a bipartisan complainer, I guess, in that case. But there's you can read it for yourself. I just do it out of habit. Yes, ma'am.
I think about campaign financing as more of a tactical approach or a tactical opportunity. But what I'm most concerned about is their strategic thinking. In other words, when they have events such as voting rights are human rights.
Right.
As they transition to having some of our illegals actually have the right to vote. So I'd like to have you discuss some of the strategic thinking that you're seeing that are coming on the forefront that we'll have to compete against in the marketplace of voter.
Right. I mean, most of us want fair and honest elections, which apparently makes us quite different from the left. And so because of that, right, we believe there should be basic rules and everybody follows those rules. So the problems that we have generally been uncovering with the voting process, and our state is at the forefront of this, so don't think that this is very applicable to us, is the best way to cheat in elections, it always has been for hundreds of years, is to basically just fluff the voter rolls, right? It's not about machine counting as much. It's really just about putting a bunch of people on the ballot that either aren't real or you get their ballots and you vote for them. Tammany Hall in the 1800s, right? Post-Civil War South, Reconstruction, that's what they would do. This is not unusual. And in the 1960s, in fact, when they were trying to clean up the Jim Crow laws for the southern states, one of the biggest problems was they would have like 100,000 people registered to vote in a county of 20,000 people. Even down south, there's something wrong with that. And conveniently, they were always voting Democrat. And so when they stepped in to try to clean up the roll, one of the things they found was just fluffed fake voter rolls. In 2007, when they arrested Acorn in Seattle for falsifying voter records, right, which they were caught red-handed. The only reason they were caught was because they didn't pay the guy $10 an hour, right? And he was pissed off that he got ripped off, and he was a University of Washington student. In fact, they were using the public library system in downtown Seattle to create these fake voter registration cards. I mean, who knew that the Seattle public library system, library could actually be used for anything more than shooting up meth, right? That was there we go. You could make a bunch of fake voter registration. They caught the guys red-handed, unambiguous. There's plenty of articles out there. It was a very clear-cut case. And what they wanted to convince us is that this was my first time. I'd never done this before. And of course they convinced Sam Reed that. And so he bought it, and they had a $5,000 fine, and that was it. But they want you to believe that's the first time they've ever done it. And they're doing it because it works, because it's always worked. And it doesn't work enough that you can make huge, massive swings in voter results usually, but you can make a pretty big one. And most elections are determined in less than 3% of the vote, right? Most of the time. And so if you have a contentious race, and if you can fluff it up with another 1 to 2% bad votes, and it makes it easier, right, to cheat. They had this thing in Northern Ireland, I remember, where they were recognizing that vote fraud was a big problem in Northern Ireland. And so they cracked down on it and had much stricter controls over how you could register to vote, who could vote. And immediately the voter rolls dropped by 11%, roughly. And that later on, it came out that, now this was in-person voting with ID. It turned out there were teams of people that used to drive around on election day, both sides did it, and they had vans full of these people. They'd wear costumes and disguises, and they would drive around and vote in the different polling stations in the cities in Northern Ireland. And people eventually, it did come out that that's how they did it, and then once they cracked down on it, it made it a lot harder. I think there's a more sophisticated approach to how you could do it now. I certainly know how to commit vote fraud at a pretty wide scale, and I don't think anybody can catch me. So if I know how to do this is just a Joe Blow guy, average person who's spent some time on this, then you can't tell me when there's billions of dollars at stake in the budget every year that goes to people who can make a lot of money, why would they not cheat? So that's why we have to get back to this reality of transparency and full disclosure and making it as clear and obvious as possible. If we have to, right, the purple thumb, I don't know, but something, if it was good enough for Afghanistan, maybe we can implement that level of transparency here. Yes, ma'am.
How do we get back to having to show our registration? I haven't shown mine for years and years and years.
Voter, you mean ID for voter registration?
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you get back to where you're going to be showing an ID to vote? Right.
You have to show your ID.
Right. Yeah, we have a long ways to go right now in our state to get to that point. Part of what ends up happening is at some point in time, usually there's some big some event occurs that everybody realizes is so bad and so ridiculous that disgusts people enough that they start to restore some level of credibility to the voting process a little bit better. That's what we're going to end up needing here, because mail-in voting and the registration process to get there is a real problem. But it actually piggybacks on the 1993 motor voter laws federally, and there's some pretty loosey-goosey elements that introduced into the voter registration process. And it's always done under the guise of more access, but if you're not doing a good job managing the voter rolls, then bad things start to happen, right? Happens on the margins and eventually gets there. And you're right, that's where we need to go.
My voter ID, I haven't showed it at all.
Right, nobody shows their voter ID. Nobody has since 2011. No, I know. We used to back in the day, right? But not since 2011. Nobody showed their ID to vote. Yeah. So, yes, ma'am.
Can you address Klaus Schwab? He says that we're going to have nothing and be happy and
Eat bugs.
His daughter did a Twitter or something, said it's coming soon and you will have nothing and ha ha ha.
Right. So, there's a fundamental base. So she was asking about Klaus Schwab, basically the international groups. And listen, I think we have to kind of put in historical perspective the times we live in, that there's an international elitist kind of attitude, right, about how they want you to live. And that is the same today as it's always been. It's always been that way for hundreds of years. It used to be kings, maybe it's the Politburo, right? There's always been this attitude of those who are in political charge want to be able to take away your freedom and liberty for their own benefit. And it's actually more of a fundamental issue than that, because I don't know that just because they have grandiose plans, most of those plans they might have oftentimes don't come to fruition the way that they think that they're going to. Because people will resist oftentimes in some way or another, and things just don't go the way that they want them to. The fundamental problem that we have with government generally today, and why liberty and freedom is so important, is it's a distributed cost, concentrated benefits problem. All of us pay the price for every element of government around us, but a small percentage of people profit greatly from the decisions that are made. So for that small percentage of people, if you're a grant grifter here in the city of Bremerton, and you get $2 million to make sure that the homeless drug addiction problem gets worse every year, then that's your primary goal, to make sure that you get that money, right? There is no level of crime that you won't commit to make sure you get that $2 million, because that's your lifeblood for existence. So you will do what I've watched them do in Olympia. You'll slash people's tires. You'll threaten them if they come and testify against your grant, right? You will do anything to get that $2 million. And actually, you'll do anything to make sure that $2 million becomes 2.5 or 3.5. And so, to all of us, if you live in the city of Bremerton, you're probably only paying $30, $40 a year for that specific $2 million scam, right? Well, it's not worth it for you to have to pay $1,000 to get new tires in your car, or to have people look sideways at you at Costco, or to be called a racist or a homophobe, or whatever it is that they want to do, and they know this. And so who's going to actually stand up against it? Because this is a distributed cost issue. I'm going to back off because it's too much pain for me to save that $30. I don't have that particular benefit. I'll let somebody else do it. This is the problem that we face as liberty and freedom people in our country, because this is how things start to get out of control. We've allowed the public education system to create a dumbed down, completely self-destructive, it's just cratering right now. My wife is a public school teacher. Regardless of the craziness related to boys no longer girls and girls, who knows, right? 200 different pronouns. About the only part of the English language anybody's being taught in school apparently today. Despite all of these things, right? One of the things people don't realize is that the average teacher right now, teaching a couple years ago, right, they had all these different metrics, that grit, skills. We want kids to be, able to withstand difficulties and stuff. And so they would have 49 different metrics for English, for example, of what you need to be able to do. Write a letter, or, all these different rules that you would have. Those 49 metrics are now 9, right? And you can't fail anybody. And there's no level of discipline that you're going to kick somebody out of class, which simply dumbs the whole class down. And by the way, high capacity education is racist. So pretty soon, what do you have? You're paying more, you're getting a lot less, and the people who are getting the cash, right, the special interests that really feed off of that, this is big, this is important for them. And what you're going to do, what you and I are going to do, is either we're going to pull our kids out of the school, right, which 41,000 families have in Washington State in the last couple of years. We're going to put them in private school, we're going to homeschool them, or we're going to just be heavily engaged, as I am. I have 4 kids in public school, and I'm heavily engaged in their education, so they do well. Most people aren't going to do that, right? And so it's just not worth the pain and suffering of dealing with it. And so it just continues to degrade. But we have to get involved and engage in that process. There's no choice. We have to do something about it. And I think part of it's exposing the truth about what's going on, and then part of it's getting organized with other people. And then we have to have a plan for success. And I know that sounds funny if you're part of the rebellion here, but we have to have a plan for success. I'm not planning to ever work for government, but I have one exception. If we actually did accidentally have a Republican get elected in Washington State, right, and crazier things have happened, the one job that I'll take in government is to be the guy who cuts agencies and fires people. Life mission here, because somebody has to do it, and I've heard the promises before and nobody's willing to. But if you're going to do that, you better have a plan. You better be able to pick the agencies, and you better have some knowledge about how they operate and which ones you can cut, and nobody will ever notice. Easy example, right? Puget Sound Partnership. If you fired everybody related to that agency, nobody will know. It's simply the better world when they're all gone, because you're paying less for whatever abuse that they were doing, just justified in how they could fill their seats in that Tacoma office. And again, I can go systematically through almost every agency in Washington State and identify whole departments that could go away tomorrow, and we'd all be better off. And so that's the kind of thing, you have to have a plan, right? But you can't necessarily eliminate everything, right? I would like the Department of Transportation to learn how to build bridges that don't collapse. There are some basic things that would be nice to educate them on. But the truth is, you have to shrink that size of government. There's no other way to ensure freedom. Your money is actually your property. And right now, most of what's taken by government gets wasted. It just does. And it's being wasted and squandered in pathetic and embarrassing ways. None of the money you're putting into these homeless grants in Kitsap County or Bremerton or Thurston County or Seattle, none of that money is being spent well. In fact, most of it's being spent to make the problem get worse. Almost all of it. And nobody running these organizations, and they get plenty of good people on the front lines and volunteers who think they're trying to make a difference, right? They're going to go out and try to help. But nobody who's actually running those organizations that are taking that grant money has any plan to actually make things better in your community. And that's the challenge at a little level, right? Sometimes it's easy to tell the story if you can look at something small, and then people can extrapolate it to understand the bigger problems. And I think those are the things that we have to focus on exposing and being involved in and engaged in. Because big change happens suddenly, and it's nice to have a plan when you go into those big changes. And we're on an sustainability, right? It's a word that the left likes to use all the time. So they may not believe in math, but the truth is we're unsustainable in how much money we're spending for government and where things are going right now. And it's going to hit some kind of a crisis point, whatever that is. Just like New York City hit it in the 1970s when they couldn't pay their power bill and they were having blackouts right downtown. Things happen, and eventually then you need change. And it'd be good if we had some kind of a plan for change. When I was a college, you can tell me if I'm pushing the edge here, but when I was a college Republican, I took over the college Republican, so I was at Columbia. Everybody should take over something. And one of the things I remember doing is I brought Rudy Giuliani to campus, since we're on a New York theme here. I brought him to campus the year before he ran for mayor. He was going to run for mayor, I think he was running, but it was a year later, the election. And one of the things I remember was I had been in a sociology class at Columbia, which is a terrible class at a school like that. And I remember my professor, she was willing to let me debate the idea of crime and punishment. I was going to argue that we were failing society by not punishing criminals. And so in order for me to have, of course I couldn't read any of the books that she assigned in class, right? To actually debate the other side, which was her class and everyone else in there. And so it was this poor guy who was a foreign student from the Dominican Republic, and he and I were on one side, and then it was basically the whole class and the professor on the other. In order to do my homework, this is pre-internet, just a couple years before the internet came around, and I went and did research, and I found James Q. Wilson's study on crime and punishment and the broken windows theory and a lot of the other ideas that came out of reform in that process. And actually I learned a lot reading his books, so I had something to talk about when I went up there. So in between the screaming students that were yelling at me, because it was close to a riot in that class, they were really mad at me. I thought I did a pretty good job, if you could actually get it through the mess, the noise. But when I brought Rudy Giuliani a year later to campus, I realized he had probably read these books because he was repeating, and it turned out later on he did, that James Q. Wilson's study on crime and punishment, broken windows theory, and how to fix a city. And I don't think people realize just how bad New York City was. When I was there, my sophomore year, 2,200 people were murdered 10 miles from my dorm room. And it wasn't even considered that big of a deal. It just, they were celebrated the next year, it went down to 2,100, right? I mean, it was terrible. Crime was so out of control. No one who lives in Washington State has ever experienced this, ever. Nothing even close. I mean, Seattle might try mightily to get to that level, but it was far worse than I think anybody here can realize. And I saw it firsthand as somebody living there. And when he got elected, violent crime dropped 66% in 1 year. 66% is the greatest drop in violent crime ever recorded in modern history. And he didn't do it by taking away all your freedom and liberties. He did it by doing the right thing and implementing reasonable, rational policies. But he came in there with a plan and he implemented the plan. We need more people like that. The other thing I want to just close with, if I can, I had a chance to speak up at Evergreen State College a number of years ago. Some of you have heard this story before. I've since been banned. But this professor allowed me to come in and speak to her class. And they wanted to hear from a conservative activist, somebody who cares about, they just call them conservative activists, and that was me. So the professor was trying to tell me before I went in front of the class, I've told him not to call you names. I've told him, not to spit on you, right? It was just kind of ridiculous. You only have to be here an hour, that kind of thing. And so I spoke for about 20 minutes, and there was this full Q&A back and forth. And one of the things that happened was, towards the end of this, about an hour and a half, hour and 3/4 into it, this student gets up in the back, right? And it sticks in my mind to this day. And I hope that you listen to this story, because this girl gets up, she says, I've been here for 6 years. I'm a senior now, finally graduated, which apparently is how long you stay at Evergreen. And she said, how come I'm graduating from this school right now? And nothing that we've just talked about. I've never heard any of these concepts before. Not once. It's not her fault that she's a leftist. She's never heard a single thing. from our side. I mean, I was talking about basic stuff, right? Property rights, individual freedom and liberty, radical ideas at Evergreen. And so that made the professor mad, of course, and so they were asking all kinds of questions, you know, they were trying to throw me off, right, with their questions. The advantage that you and I have over the left, and we always will, is that we know exactly what they believe. We really do. Because I've had to read it when I was in college. I've had to debunk it, right, my whole life. I understand all the books. There's nothing that professor was going to ask me that I hadn't heard before. And I understand what she believes. I understand everything she's read to get to her ridiculous belief system. But she has no idea what I believe. They don't have any idea what you believe in this room at all. They don't even care. And when you can open up that door and shine the light on truth in these different ways, different things that make a difference, it's like suddenly the light goes off, just like that student in that classroom, and things start to change. So we're in a time where I think things change fast, but we have to have a plan, I think.
Yes.
Okay, I got. Should you want me to take one more, or am I just pushing the time here?
I
Well, Sharon wasn't. Sharon hasn't asked a question, so yes,
Can I use your mic?
you can.
Okay. I've been an observer several times down in Pierce County.
Mm-hmm.
I see how it works, and it looks like everything is going great. But my burning question that I came here to ask you
Okay.
is, what about the companies that own the computers? Do we still need to worry about that? And if I was a hacker, I would fix it so that when they test the computer to see if it's working, I would
Right.
fix it so that during that time it would look like it worked perfectly.
Sure.
So I don't trust any of that part of our election. I am going to vote though.
Well, thank you for voting. That's important. Yes, trust nothing, right? Always presume everybody's corrupt, right? And you'll rarely be disappointed. Part of it's the way I describe bureaucracy as a mountain of corruption concealed by an ocean of incompetence, right? That's kind of government today. So don't ever trust anything. But I will tell you, all the hand recounts that I've been involved in, almost 30 of them now, roughly in our state, I've never found huge variations between what the count number is and what the hand recount is. And we have to have paper attached to it, one way or the other. Now, I understand all the different ways that could be fake too, but I'm just letting you know that I've had enough of that experience, that my belief is that the problem is much earlier than that, and it's safer to do bad things with the voter rolls than it is to try to manipulate a process that's being observed. Don't trust the machines, don't trust anything. There's a lot of things I would fix in the process, but I think that the biggest issue is still fluffy voter rolls, because that type of activity's always happened, and people usually get away with it. So why would you change something that's working? And that would be my concern. I'd focus on that a lot. So with that, I'm getting
Sharon has something
Oh,
to
okay.
give you.
Okay, you got your mic? Should we have competing mics, or should I give this one to you?
I'm not sure if we'll get feedback.
Okay.
Nope.
All right. Well, I can give this mic to you here. Guys, thank you so much for having me here today. Before she gets up, I do have a YouTube channel. How many of you have seen my YouTube channel? A couple people? The rest of you are missing out. That shadow banning works. So, We the Governed, go to the UI YouTube channel, take a look at some of the videos, like 300 of them there. You don't have to watch them all. But subscribe to the channel. Doesn't mean anything. It just means you click a button. And my website's We the Governed. I haven't done a lot on that just lately. I'm getting ready to relaunch it. And if anybody ever wants to support We the Governed, either you do that here or you can do it in the jar that my wife started making me carry that around. So anyway, that's it. All right.
I would like, I'm glad you brought the attention to this. I think we're going to put this right now up front. Barbara, would you come and get this while we complete our meeting? And any of you that feel led to donate to this wonderful cause, you don't have to come up front and be conspicuous. So right now, Sharon has a gift for you.
Oh.
We just want to thank you so much for coming out and giving us your time. But more, we want to thank you for what you're doing. It is just fantastic. And be sure to listen to your station, because that's where you'll really find out what is going on. So our club wants to thank you by giving you a book called The 5,000 Year Lead.
Yes.
Do you know
Yes,
of this?
I do. Great book.
Do you already have one?
I don't have this one.
Okay.
I don't, but I'm familiar with it. So
That's
thank you
great.
so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for Thank you guys.
You
It's always
bet.
good.
One
Yeah,
more
where's the
thing.
pitch? Somebody's supposed to get a photo for your club on that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, yep.
And now, if you took those 28 principles and went to any country in the world, they could have a constitution and be free just like us.
Yes.
If they're immoral people, and
If
that's
they're
the
immoral
first
people.
principle. Okay, and also, here's a little pamphlet. I teach Constitution basic classes all over the region, and this is kind of the PowerPoint of the
Perfect.
class, so it's just kind of Constitution in short.
All right.
Okay,
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
Picture posing, go ahead.
Somebody's got the camera here, right? Okay, here we go. Here we go.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you.
And I'll stay around for people who want to, yeah. Yeah, I'll stay here for anybody who wants to chit chat or ask questions or organize an activist training up here, which would be really good. So,
I want to do something that I should have done earlier. I have a question for Glenn. I was researching some things online, and particularly about our new state chair and his plan. And what I saw was that each state is, of course, connected to the RNC, and they have an initiative called Bank Your Vote. Are you familiar with this at all? I would love to have, and maybe not now, but I am curious what this means. And they did talk about voter, what is it? Not laundering, but collecting the ballot harvesting. And I was quite intrigued, and it's about time we saw a light from the top. But I just wondered if you'd heard about that. And
Sure.
if you
I'm
could.
familiar with all three variations.
Okay. Do you think it sounds okay?
I can explain it if you want.
Give me a 2-minute update.
Sure. Bank Your Vote is basically an idea that you get out and vote early so that you have nobody else votes for you, and that it just builds up a majority long before election night comes around. And because a lot of people forget, you have that ballot that sits on your kitchen table and gets buried by the kids' report cards or something else, and you just forget to turn them in. I'd be lying if I told you that I'd never had that happen to me. Even I have years ago. So I remember that. That's what Bank Your Vote. Ballot harvesting is essentially something that should be illegal, but it is legal in our state, and it allows you to go out and harvest ballots that other people are supposed to have filled out themselves and accumulate them together yourself and then turn them in directly to the auditor's office. It's legal now. Whether it should be or not is a totally separate question. The fact is it is. The other side does it. We should do it too. Related to that is a third one, which is if you go to apartment complexes or post offices, you will see ballots, when they get mailed out, thrown all over the place in the garbage. They're laying in the ground, they're in the dumpsters. People who have moved or something else, they're just loose ballots laying out. And part of ballot harvesting is to pull the ones that aren't real and get them off the street so that nobody else is filling them out and turning in fake votes. So that's it.